He planned the nursery. He booked the anniversary trip. He forgave the late-night texts from someone named Jordan. Until one night, he opened her phone, and Jordan had long red nails, a wine glass, and lips that weren't his wife's. Ethan from the Upper West Side, Jordan wasn't short for what he thought. Series, 10 True Affair Stories from New York. Ethan never checked her phone. It wasn't about trust, it was about respect. Boundaries. Space. All the things he believed made a marriage stronger. For 5 years, that belief had served them well. Or so he thought. It was late, close to midnight, when she finally fell asleep. They'd spent the evening choosing baby names, narrowing down options for the nursery paint. He remembered how her eyes lit up at the name Mila. How she rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "It's really happening, isn't it?" Now she was curled under the blanket, breathing softly. Ethan reached for her phone only to set the morning alarm. Hers was synced with the smart lights. He had done it before. It was routine. He tapped the screen. The background glowed gently, an ultrasound photo she'd set as wallpaper. His heart tightened in the familiar way it always did when he saw it. And then the notification appeared. "Jordan, can't wait to see you tonight, red heart." He froze. Not because of what it said, but because of the name. Jordan. Jordan was her coworker. The one she mentioned often. The one who made her laugh at 10 p.m. text messages. The one whose name always came with the phrase, "It's just work." His thumb hovered over the screen. He shouldn't. But he tapped. The message thread opened. The last 10 messages scrolled up easily, breezy, flirty, fast-paced. Some were short. "Missing you already. Loved last night. Same time tomorrow." Others weren't so short. Ethan sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. His heart didn't race. It sank. Quietly. Like something heavy dropped into dark water. He scrolled up. Photos. Inside jokes. Voice notes. One of them ended with her giggling and whispering, "I wish I could stay longer." He read everything. Not once did the word work appear. Not once was there a hint of professional context. Just intimacy. Familiarity. A rhythm between them that had clearly been established for months. He stared at the screen. Trying to blink it away. Trying to invent an alternate explanation. Maybe Jordan was a nickname. Maybe this was someone else. But the tone. The way she responded. The words she used, those weren't for a friend. He placed the phone back on the nightstand. He didn't shake her awake. He didn't shout. Instead, he stood, walked to the kitchen, and sat in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. The living room was still. Too still. As if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ethan put his head in his hands. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not now. Not when they were planning a family. Not when he had already pictured her in the delivery room, gripping his hand, crying with joy. He thought of the registry they'd started. The doctor's appointments. The way she looked at baby clothes like they were miracles stitched in cotton. And then he thought of Jordan. Whoever Jordan was. He tried to rationalize. Maybe it was emotional. Maybe it hadn't become physical. Maybe it was just a phase, something born out of fear, anxiety, restlessness. But even that thought didn't comfort him. Because whatever it was, it had been shared. And it hadn't been shared with him. When he finally returned to the bedroom, she was still sleeping peacefully. Her arm draped across the pillow. The faint trace of a smile on her lips. Ethan watched her for a long time. And for the first time in 5 years, he realized there were parts of her he didn't know. And someone else did. Ethan sat in the kitchen long after the sky turned from black to gray. He hadn't slept. He hadn't moved much, either. Just stared at nothing, the phone still in his hand, the conversation burned into his brain. By 6 a.m., she was still asleep. He padded quietly back into the bedroom, sat on the floor beside the bed, and opened her phone again. This time, he opened Instagram. He typed in Jordan. The first suggestion was Jordanella. Her profile popped up instantly. Public. Polished. Confident. The woman in the profile photo had long auburn hair, a strong jawline, and a gaze that didn't flinch. She was standing on a rooftop, cocktail in hand, city lights behind her like a crown. And right there, in her bio, it said, she/her. Ethan stared. Jordan. Jordanella. Not a nickname. Not a male coworker. Not someone from her marketing team. A woman. He scrolled through the feed. Pictures of wine nights. Art galleries. A selfie in a hotel mirror that looked painfully familiar. The tone was effortless, magnetic. Ethan could see it why someone might be drawn in. He went back to the texts. Read them again. The pronouns were all there. Clear. Intentional. My girl. She makes me feel like I can breathe again. Us. He hadn't seen them clearly the first time. Hadn't wanted to. Now, they screamed. His wife hadn't been hiding a friendship. She hadn't even been hiding an affair, not exactly. What she had been hiding was herself. And the version of her she gave to Jordanella wasn't the one Ethan knew. He felt cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver, but the kind that numbs. That spread slowly, like a realization you can't unsee. It wasn't the betrayal that gutted him most. It was that someone else had been given the version of her that was free. Raw. Honest. And he, the husband, had been left with the curated one. The one that smiled politely, discussed crib options, and texted him reminders about prenatal vitamins. Ethan rested the phone on his lap. He didn't feel rage. Just a strange stillness, like the moment before a storm or the moment after. She stirred behind him in bed, mumbling something in her sleep. He didn't turn. He already knew what she would say. Or worse, what she wouldn't. The silence between them was no longer soft. It was loaded. And for the first time in their marriage, Ethan wasn't sure whose life he'd been living. But he knew whose he hadn't. Ethan didn't confront her the next morning. Or the one after that. He didn't even flinch when she leaned over to kiss his cheek and ask if he wanted scrambled or poached. He just watched. For days, he observed the rhythm of their life like someone watching a play they'd once acted in. The gestures were the same: morning coffee, shared calendars, grocery runs, but something inside him had stepped out of sync. The set hadn't changed. The roles had. When she left her laptop open, he read her emails. Most were routine, work-related. But mixed in, buried between spreadsheets and brand pitch drafts, were threads from an encrypted address. The name wasn't signed, but he didn't need it to be. The subject lines were innocuous: options, let's revisit, next steps. But the contents were anything but. They spoke of money being moved slowly, small withdrawals disguised as routine expenses. Notes about IVF consultations in California. A timeline that aligned suspiciously well with Ethan's planned work trip in the fall. One email read, "I want us settled before New York freezes over." Ethan scrolled down to a thread of shared links: real estate listings, fertility clinic reviews, flights tagged one way. All neatly planned. Not a word about him. Not even a lie. It wasn't a betrayal of passion. It was logistics. Strategy. Execution. The baby? A possibility, but maybe not his. He closed the laptop slowly, gently, as though not to wake something more dangerous. The next evening, they had dinner together. Thai takeout. The same place they always ordered from on Wednesdays. She laughed about a coworker's typo. She touched his arm when she asked if he remembered to buy more oat milk. He watched her as if she were a stranger using his wife's voice. When she turned to put the dishes in the sink, he spoke. "Do you still love me?" She froze. One hand still holding a spoon. Then, without turning, she said, "That's not the question you want to ask." He didn't press. Later, after she went to bed, he stayed up in the living room. The email thread was still open in his head like a tab he couldn't close. He walked into their bedroom. She was awake. He stood in the doorway. "How long?" She didn't pretend. Didn't dodge. She sat up. Her face unreadable. "Long enough," she said. "Why didn't you just tell me?" She hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. "I stopped being your wife long before I met her." The words landed without sound. No crash. No echo. Just the dull weight of something final. Ethan didn't cry. He only nodded. Then turned around and closed the door behind him. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was absolute. Ethan left on a Monday. He packed before sunrise. A duffel bag, a laptop, a small box of photos he hadn't looked at in months. No ceremony. No suitcase. Just the things he wouldn't want to miss if he never came back. The apartment was quiet. She was still asleep when he zipped the bag. Or maybe pretending to be. He didn't check. He brewed a pot of coffee out of habit. Let it sit untouched. The sound of the drip machine was the only thing that moved in the room. The light outside hadn't turned gold yet. It was the gray kind of morning that makes everything look like it belongs to no one. He placed his wedding ring on the kitchen table. Next to it, a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was his. Sharp, clear. Not angry. Next time, just tell the truth. It hurts less than being replaced by a plan. He left the keys in the dish by the door. Didn't look back. He didn't text. Didn't call. Didn't leave a forwarding address. The only thing he carried from that apartment, besides the bag, was his breath. And for the first time in weeks, it felt full. On the train out of the city, he stared at the blur of tunnels giving way to sky. He thought about what had ended and what hadn't. He hadn't lost a wife. He'd stepped out of a role. One he didn't know he'd been cast in. One that came with a script he never wrote, full of lines he no longer believed. Maybe she never loved him the way he thought. Maybe she had. Maybe she just changed. He didn't know. He didn't need to. Because in the end, it wasn't the betrayal that undid him. It was the planning. The meetings, the clinics, the one-way flights all drawn up in quiet, while he memorized lullaby lyrics. He had never wanted perfection. Just partnership. But what he'd been living in was performance. He leaned his head against the window. Didn't cry. Didn't need to. He was done trying to understand a silence that had already answered everything. And that, he thought, was the closest thing to peace he'd felt in a long time. He didn't scream. He didn't chase. He just walked away. From a life someone else had written for him. But in our next story, a woman from Harlem never suspected a thing. Until her son, barely old enough to spell dad, asked a question at breakfast. A question no child should know to ask. A question that cracked everything. Stay with us for the next chapter in 10 True Affair Stories from New York. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't come from a lover. It comes from the only witness who didn't know how to lie.